Welcome to Leadership Kung Fu with your hosts, Sandi Verrecchia and Jennifer Long.
So welcome to another episode of Leadership Kung Fu, where we explore the leadership topics and challenges we encounter every day in our work as coaches. For those of you who are new to our podcast, we use the Kung Fu metaphor because we believe for leaders, the learning never ends. Becoming a strong leader takes ongoing practice, discipline, self-awareness, and humility. I'm Sandi Verrecchia, CEO of Satori Consulting in Toronto, and I'm joined with my excellent co-host, Jennifer Long from Own Up in Denver, Colorado. Jen, so great to see you and happy 4th of July weekend.
Great to see you and thank you. Yeah, 250 we are. Feeling it. I think we're feeling it this year.
Yes, I'm sure you are. It's a good segue into our discussions today.
Yes.
Every so often we like to mix up our podcast and invite a guest. And today we're thrilled to have with us Doug Stevens, who I've just found out is a neighbor of mine, but also one of the world's leading retail and business futurists and the founder of Retail Profit. Doug is known as the futurist that futurists follow, and he has advised some of the most recognized brands and is the author of 4 international bestsellers. Doug has recently finished his 4th book, The Future of Competitive Advantage, a business plan to serve your customers, your company, and democracy. And Jen and I had a sneak peek, and we're going to chat about it today. So welcome, Doug.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yes, super excited. And Sandi and I had a little bit of a chat before we got you online to just sort of talk about the read. And when does the book come out? Is it out yet?
The book is out. Yeah,
It's
it came out June
okay.
2nd. Yes.
And you can get it at all the places you buy your books, I'm assuming, because it's published by Wiley.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. So listeners, you can find the book everywhere. One of the things that you say in the book, and this is, I think, where it kind of starts for me, is as the world becomes less democratic, everything, including your business, becomes less safe and secure. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that, when I read that, I was like, ooh, yes, say more. And then that's when you introduce the rest of it. Oh my God, he's put words around all the things I've been feeling and where the discomfort is right now. And so I thought that might be a good place to start.
Yeah, thank you. So, through the process of researching this book, I was really compelled to sort of visit my own experience, my own life as a business person and as a business leader. And I can honestly say that, each day when I woke up in the morning and was thinking about getting into the office and getting with staff and all of that, a lot of things were crossing my mind. I was thinking perhaps about the economic conditions. I was thinking about, the competitive environment. I might have been thinking about ongoing projects that we had as a company that were in play. But I never woke up and thought, good thing I'm waking up in a democracy today, as a business person. And frankly, I don't even know through most of my adult life that I ever really reflected on the value of democracy. We vote every few years, and then we usually grumble about, who it was that we voted for or the party in power. But beyond that, I never really truly reflected on the value of democracy to my business, to the rule of law that it affords, to the representative nature of government and what that provides to business people, giving them an outlet, to take their grievances to someone whose job it is to listen to them and to represent them to the federal administration. So we are now, and I think in the book I say democracy is a lot like oxygen, in that you're not conscious of it until it starts to leave the room. And then all of a sudden you start to see in stark contrast what that means. And of course, when we look across the border right now into the U.S. I am a Canadian, but I've lived and I've worked in the U.S., so I have a cultural sensitivity to the American life. We are seeing the disintegration of a lot of democratic institutions. We are seeing freedom of speech being embattled. We are seeing the free market being endangered. We're seeing the federal government now encroaching on the free market. We are seeing, immigration raids that are dramatically impacting the workforce across sectors, whether we're talking about manufacturing or agriculture. So it's vitally important that we as business people wake up each morning and do take stock of the freedoms and privileges and rights that a democratic government affords us, and we should be doing everything in our power to defend that.
Wholly agree. I wholly
Yeah.
agree. And
Mhm.
and it was just like, oof. And then I wanted you to say more. Sandy, you've got a question.
Yeah, it's like, tell us more. So a lot of leaders, Doug, are trying to avoid politics altogether. But your book seems to argue that silence is no longer neutral. How should leaders think about the difference between political courage and political tribalism?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I, like most people, and I'm sure you were brought up this way as well. You were brought up with the ethos that you never mix business and politics. These are two separate things, and they should never be mixed in the same conversation. And when you think about that, it's kind of absurd, really, because the political realm directly impacts business and the markets and policy and the economy, all of which are very important, of course, to business leaders. And the business world also impacts the political realm. As businesses become larger and more powerful, they gain a certain level of political power. That's very obvious. So the idea that these two things should never be talked about in the same conversation seems absurd. I think the better question is, when and how should we be talking about politics and business in the same conversations? And one thing I learned on this journey that the book took me on is that there really are some accepted guidelines on how to step into the political realm as a business, but do so in a way that is legitimate and responsible and doesn't undermine democracy. If anything, it strengthens it. I'll give you a good example. We of course know the brand Patagonia,
Yeah.
and they are famous for their dedication and commitment to environmental concerns. And one could argue that if there's a core value, if there's a cornerstone to that brand, it is environmental protection. I mean, really, the business was built for that sole purpose, to protect, to contribute to environmental causes. In 2017, I believe, don't quote me on that, but I think it was 2017, the Trump administration moved uh, to sequester federal lands in an area of the U.S. called Bears Ear Monument, which I believe is in
Utah.
Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a pristine national monument, millions of acres, and they were going to take a portion of that and open it up to tourism, to mining, and that sort of thing. And Patagonia immediately moved on that. They immediately moved into action. Within 24 hours, their website was changed to say, the president just stole your land, and began to educate their consumers about what had just happened and why. Not only was it an affront to environmental protectionism, but it was also illegal, because the president can't make that unilateral decision. That's an act of only an act of Congress can reclaim lands that have been given to the public. So within 24 hours, the website changed. I think within 48 hours, they had launched a lawsuit against the Trump administration. And for several years, this sort of bounced around in the courts. And ultimately, the land remained public and Bears Ears Monument remained intact. It's a good example, however, of when a brand can legitimately get involved in politics, because what Patagonia was doing was number one, defending a value that was core to its brand. It wasn't the whim of its founder or some political axe to grind on the part of its CEO. It was a value that was core to the brand, core to their consumer, and core to their employees. And the second thing was they were defending the rule of law. And every business leader ought to be on the front line whenever the rule of law is put into jeopardy, particularly when it's being put into jeopardy by your own government, because the rule of law is really the thing that protects every business from having property or assets seized, from undue coercion or corruption. So if we don't stand up in those moments, we really risk losing the very thing that protects each and every business in the economy.
Fact. And it's a brave thing and it's a big ask. And that's kind of an interesting um, thing I was grappling with as I was reading the book. And so, just for the listeners to get a big understanding, like your book has three major ideas that I think appear to be central, right? So one is that what we've been talking about, that business can't thrive if society is failing, right? That weakening democratic institutions, declining trust, growing inequality, and an unaffordable education system ultimately undermine the markets themselves, which I think is absolutely, and the stories that you tell and the information you provide, I think is just stunning. Um, Another thing you talk about is trust becoming a strategic asset, right? This idea of radical trust um, as a hard competitive advantage. I want to talk about this. Companies that earn and sustain trust with employees, customers, and communities, and that's an ability to outperform competitors. And then the third area is about democracy, fairness, and education. Those are all business issues. And I
Yeah.
think that's a very interesting, because I've had conversations with executives on some of these things, and I was like, oof. Um, so I want to we've got some questions about each of those, and I know Sandy's got one that she's probably going to start with, so I'll just hand it to you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so we tell employees that trust matter, and but when we're rewarding our reward systems, especially for CEOs, they overwhelmingly lean toward compensating for share price and short-term financial performance. So until executive compensation changes, aren't we simply asking leaders to behave against their own incentives?
Um, yes. Uh,
The short
yes.
answer.
Yes, we are. We are. But at the same time, I think what we're asking leaders to do is recognize the unsustainability of the current situation. Give you an example. Um, Starbucks was having problems. They were having some pretty deep business problems of late. Revenues were lagging, customer loyalty was waning, uh, high turnover, et cetera, more competition. They brought in Brian Nickel, who was formerly with Chipotle. And Brian Nickel is compensated at a rate that is 6,666 times what the average Starbucks worker makes. And I'm not talking about the average barista, I'm talking about the average Starbucks worker. That includes executives,
Executive.
Executives, yeah.
management. So this guy is being paid, in the stratosphere at a level that is almost incomprehensible. Um, One of his first moves in coming to the company was to initiate more ways for consumers to tip baristas, not to institute a new wage equity plan or better working conditions or more opportunities for advancement for people at store level, they instituted more ways for the consumer to tip their baristas. So, in other words, Brian Nickel, that's fair game, 6,000 times the average employee. But when it comes to the average employee, we're going to leave it up to the customer to decide whether or not you should earn a living wage. And by the way, Starbucks also happens to be one of the low wage 100 companies in the United States. So, what's the message there? What's the message to the employee? Is it that you care about me? Is it that fairness matters? Is it that I can trust the organization with my future, with my livelihood, with the well being of my family? I don't think so. And all of that, unfortunately, undermines performance. It increases absenteeism. It dramatically increases turnover, which is a huge drag on cost, and it dramatically hits productivity. People are literally quitting on their feet while at work.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to, I think if we are going to create once again a sustainable economy, we have to revisit the way executives are compensated, because you're absolutely right. It's completely disconnected from the performance of the company in a real way, right?
Mm.
It's more connected to share price, which, through the advent of things like share buybacks, can easily be influenced. Earnings per share can easily be influenced in the face of even bad performance from an operational standpoint. So executives, in other words, can be well compensated while driving a company straight into the ground. And we've seen that happen over and over again.
Totally.
So it's just not a sustainable way of running businesses, and it's not a sustainable way of managing an economy.
So I wanted to follow up on that one because, I work with a lot of boards and, share price is king or queen, if you will. And I can't imagine the conversation that they would have had that said, I'm going to increase wages and our share price could potentially go down as a result, right? As opposed to, I'm going to do this thing where we don't have to pay for it and they'll be compensated. And inevitably, the courage around the board table has to be there, and I don't see a lot of courage around board tables. They're self preserving their roles as board members and their compensation that goes with it.
Right. What you've hit on, and I'll try and take it. I'll answer your question directly, and then I'll provide a couple of examples that might better illuminate what I'm talking about. First and foremost, you're absolutely right that when I started writing this book, I thought, what this book cannot be is a moral soapbox that I get on and say, everybody should be kinder, gentler, and we should run businesses with more empathy and concern for the average worker, because I knew that from my own experience, if you speak that way to a board, if you speak that way to the average CEO, their eyes glaze over, they don't hear anything you're saying, and they're just simply waiting for you to stop talking so they can leave the room, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to win on that basis. What I discovered along the way is that there's an extremely compelling business case to be made for the things that I'm talking about. So when I'm talking about trust and fairness and collective human intelligence, there's an incredibly strong business case that shows that the results of doing that are tremendous. Businesses that exercise those values outperform businesses that do not. They live longer and they outperform. Give you an example of this in real time, and it's one I talk about in the book. If you go back to 1953 and you look at the 1953 shareholder report for General Electric, that at that time, just for reference, General Electric was an incredibly successful, innovative, dynamic company They were pioneering all kinds of new technologies. They were growing. They were just one of the most respected companies on earth. Countries around the world would look at General Electric and try and emulate, within their own borders, companies like that. They were kind of the gold standard. When you look at their share report, in order, they sort of said, first and foremost, we pay our employees a lot of money. And that's a good thing because it contributes to the prosperity, happiness, wellness of our employees, and that makes them more productive. The second thing they said was, we also pay our suppliers an enormous amount of money as well. And that's a good thing too, because that enables them to pay their people very well. And that just adds to the collective prosperity. You go through all the line items, we spend a ton on innovation, research, development. You get down to the last point, and it's sort of, oh, and by the way, we also pay our shareholders a reasonable return.
Yeah.
That was it. Now, in 1980, Jack Welch takes over. And in the backdrop of the early 1980s, you had the Friedman Doctrine. Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economists came to government and basically made the case that the post-war era up until about 1980, they had it all wrong. That it wasn't the corporation's obligation was not to the employee, to the consumer, to communities of operation. It was to the shareholder. And if CEOs just focused on delivering to shareholders and making shareholders wealthy, that all that wealth would trickle down to the ground level, and you'd have mass prosperity and joy, and everyone would be better off. Jack Welch said, "Okay, hold my beer. Here we go." And for the next 20 years, Jack Welch basically engineered consistent returns for shareholders no matter what it took. If he had to lay off 10,000 people, bye-bye, no problem. If he had to cut research and development, cut projects, jettison newly acquired companies, anything he needed to do to hit that quarterly return, he would do it. And over that 20-year period, despite the 200 books that are written about what a genius Jack Welch was as a manager, he ran General Electric into the ground. By 2001, that company was a shadow of its former self. And if I'm not mistaken, in 2018, it was delisted from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So this whole notion of shareholder primacy is an extraction strategy that has a ceiling. You can't just keep extracting forever. Eventually, you hit a point where there's nothing left to extract, and that's when the company goes blackout.
Yeah, yeah. I've had these conversations. I was so excited when I read this whole episode in the book because I've sat across from CFOs and had the conversation. And organizational presidents in the Fortune 400, where they are trying to do a transformation of the business and they're trying to get that profit margin up, or deliver on time, do all the things that they say they're going to do. And in the introduction, in some of the slides for all these leaders, was this whole diagram that included why we're here, and the shareholder was on the top of the list. And I got into a big thing and said, all of the research says otherwise. No one is going to care. If you want to talk to the hearts and minds of these people, nobody here cares about the shareholder. They care about being able to buy a tank of gas.
Exactly.
They care about getting their kid into college. I'm like, this is fundamentally wrong. And if you're going to transform this business, you need to transform how you're thinking about why you're in business.
That's right.
And so I was like, where was this book when I needed it?
You're absolutely right. And to prove your point, and this is one you can tuck in your pocket the next time that conversation comes up. But to prove your point and to show that it can be done, I also describe the situation in the book whereby in 2014, uh, Walmart, which at the time was plagued with problems, absolutely plagued with problems. This was, a company that had only a few years earlier was being maligned in the press for having signs up in some of their stores that were doing like turkey drives and food drives for their employees, asking consumers to donate a turkey so that a staff member can eat at the holidays. And the Walmart PR department was sort of blowing it off like, yeah, I mean, our people are very supportive of one another. And I was like, dude, you're missing the point. People shouldn't be begging for food in your stores. You're not paying people enough. So that was the backdrop. Walmart was, involved in all kinds of labor issues, factory fires in India. I mean, it seemed like every bad thing that happened on earth had some sort of connection to Walmart. Doug McMillon, who took over in 2014, actually took the reins in 2015. He started on the loading docks as a 16-year-old with Walmart, worked his way up through the ranks as an assistant manager, store manager. He was moving very, very quickly through the ranks. Eventually, was running a division of Walmart, and then was tapped for the role of CEO. And at the time, I was being asked to come down and speak to Walmart about strategy. So I expected that Doug McMillon was just going to be more of the same. I thought this guy's going to, he's a company man. He's going to come in, he's going to just continue the music as long as it'll play. Much to my surprise, he did not. Doug McMillon came in. The first thing he did was he instituted a $1 billion wage increase across the board for all employees, all frontline entry level employees. The share price tanked. Investors went running. They thought this is not what what we're looking for, right? We don't want someone who cares about people. We just want someone who's going to drive better share price. So he spent money on training. He improved wages. He instituted a schedule so that wages would continue to improve. Walmart started working on pathways for succession and advancement and career opportunities. He was literally rebuilding the company and at the same time focusing on Walmart's environmental impact. So it can be done. And I mean, Walmart, to my mind, what Doug McMillon did was he saved that company. Walmart was in danger of being eaten alive by Amazon and the rest of the market, and by their own, failures, their own internal failures. And he saved that company, and he did it by giving a shit about the people that work on the front lines.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because as you talk about this, it brings up two things that sort of in the book for me. I was like, how do you think about this? Because you talk about leaders have to have courage to do this, right? One of the fundamental premises is if you want this competitive advantage, it's gonna take some courage, and you got to get a coalition of people with you, right? And then there's a whole thing about what you termed as what you termed as stoking white male anxiety. And when we've got 49%, what would we find? 49% of leadership right now is white male. And how that dynamic of, obviously not everybody's in stoked the same way, but is there a correlation there in terms of if we're, this is like asking Congress to do term limits?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, two points on that. So there's been obviously, over the last 20 to 25 years, maybe longer than that, you could potentially argue we go all the way back to the mid 1960s, forward. There's been a slow, painful sometimes, but steady progression forward where people who were not afforded the same rights and liberties and privileges suddenly began to obtain those, whether those were minorities, people of color, women, people with disabilities. The world slowly but surely and imperfectly was becoming a more fair place. And this previous world, this pre 1950s world of white male primacy, And I include myself in being born in, being luckily born into that club, where you had, all of these innate privileges and all of these innate opportunities simply because you were male and you were white, and you happened to be born, in a democratic nation. It was like winning the lottery 3 times in a row. That increasing fairness in the rest of society created tremendous anxiety on the part of young white men in particular, because what they were seeing was they were seeing the lives that their fathers and grandfathers had enjoyed sliding away from them. They were no longer just moved to the front of the line, because of some privilege. They were now competing with other people on the basis of intellect, ability, skill, etc. And it's never the people who are oppressed to begin with within a society where the grievance lies. It's the people who had privilege and slowly lose that privilege. That's where you really find tremendous amounts of grievance. That was exacerbated through the automation and offshoring of the late 1970s and into the 1980s, where all of a sudden, having a blue collar union job was was disappearing. That opportunity was disappearing, and you were finding a lot of white manufacturing workers were kind of falling into poverty, falling into the underclass, and that became a bit of a political chip. Politicians began sort of using that anger, trying to harness that anger to to create a sense of populism among that community, and they were doing it by basically pointing the finger at other people and saying the reason that you are downtrodden is because of these
Mm.
people that are coming to the country, or because of women who, don't understand that their place in society is in the kitchen or having children. They were stoking that anger for very political purposes. And we are seeing now the fallout of that. We're
Hmm.
witnessing this in real time, where this group has been sort of radicalized. So, does that make its way into the corner office? I suspect so. I suspect that there is this sense among many white male CEOs that they're trying to cling to that power. They're probably, in many cases, delighted to see diversity, equity, and inclusion programs go by the wayside, because
Hmm.
that removes a significant threat to their own security as well. The Again, the flip side of this, however, is that there's the business case, which I present in the book. And I was determined to present a business case because ultimately that's what we care about, right? Is the health and productivity of the business. The business case states otherwise. Diversity is great for business. Pay equity is phenomenal for business. Treating workers with dignity is fantastic. One of the strongest periods in economic history in North America was when unions were strong. All of these things that we have sort of pushed off the table are the very things that make for a very strong and robust competitive business.
Yeah. Yeah. I would definitely agree. And I think you can draw a hard line to diverse teams are, and this will probably lead in where Sandy wants to talk about is the intellectual collectivism that you talk about. It definitely lends into better innovation, better critical thinking, better perspectives at the table, right?
And over 20% better profitability
Yeah. Yeah. And oh yeah, profitability.
among, yeah.
You know, Doug, it sounds like Jen and I talk about a lot of these themes in many of our podcasts, and so we're behind you on all of this. But what really needs to shift? What do you think is the fundamental shift that organizational leaders could do, you know, soon to make things better?
I think what we're witnessing play out in real time is we're coming to the end of the era of extraction. I think that if you sort of look at it this way, from 1945 to 1975, what you had was an era of bipartisan contribution to the strength and health and vitality of the middle class. And that came through worker protections, it came through union protections, it came through things like Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, and a lot of the social programs that we saw, universal health care in Canada, for example. It was a bipartisan commitment to strengthening the middle class. And what did we see during that period of time? Mass prosperity like we have never seen before. More people moving up in society, more people acquiring the trappings of middle class life, more people attaining university educations, to the effect to an effect that we have never seen before in history. We were becoming more educated, more prosperous. Retail and business and the business sector couldn't even keep up. I mean, businesses were just exploding. A lot of the businesses we see in our landscape today, again, I'm a Canadian, so, Shoppers Drug Mart, Tim Hortons, all these companies that we take for granted, they're all products of that era of mass prosperity. From about 1980 forward, that changed. And we started shortchanging the middle class in order to line the pockets of the wealthiest in both the United States and Canada. And we have come to a point now, maybe AI is the last frontier of extraction, but we've come to a point where there is nothing left to give. We've pushed the middle class into the working class into the underclass. We live with levels of poverty in both countries that are third world in nature. I was just in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I saw, encampments of people sleeping on the sidewalk, in the pouring rain in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I thought, what's the difference between this and Portland, Oregon, or Toronto, Ontario? It's the same. And I mean, we're two of the richest countries in the world. We shouldn't have that condition, but we've done it so that we could, service the richest 10 to 20% of the population. But here's the message to business leaders, and this is what people need to get. They need to get this, get their arms wrapped around this idea. The 10 to 20% of the richest people in North America cannot and will not ever spend enough money to make up for what was a prosperous middle class. They may buy more expensive socks, but they don't have more feet.
Right.
They may buy more expensive cars, but they can't drive 5 cars at the same time. So I mean, we have to refer back to this period 1965 to 85 and say to ourselves, how we know we can't build a time machine and go back, and rebuild the past, but we have to look at what was the essence of it. And the essence of it was people trusted institutions, they trusted democracy, they felt the world was becoming more fair, and they thought they had a reasonable shot at getting an education that could advance their prospects in life. That was it. And so we, as business leaders, have a fiduciary responsibility to lean into recreating those conditions. And we can start within our own companies. And the good news is, if we do it within our own companies, like Walmart's doing it today, the business performance metrics are astonishing. So there's my
Right.
case. Ladies
I
and
love it. I love it. And
Yeah, it's perfect.
and his 3 pillars again are trust, fairness, and collective intelligence, which I think the whole idea, the information you present around education and what's happened to higher education and where people are in their learning, and the the dumbing down of people through social platforms and all of that stuff is really, really meaty reading. And so what I would say to people listening is there's all the stuff you've been feeling and the discomfort is Doug puts a really good, solid understanding, fact-based story augmented understanding of why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and then offers an very interesting plan, right? Because we're talking about a business case and a plan for leaders to really consider investing, socializing, acting on, as a response to this, to move the economy, to move society in a direction that that we all basically want to go in. And that's the interesting part, is that everyone wins in this scenario.
Right.
Even
And
CEOs.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's
And
not even
I
a want, it's a need. Like it's a need. Like
Yeah,
everybody
this
needs
is
to
not.
start.
I'm not suggesting that, someone has to lose. I mean, does it mean if you're going to pay higher wages in order to sustain your business into the future, does it mean that the shareholder might have to just adapt to a slightly lower return for a few years? Perhaps. But does it mean that you're going to still be delivering a return to them 10, 20 years into the future? Yeah, that's why you're doing it, right?
yeah,
And I think that when you look at some of the things that we do in blind service to shareholders, I tell a story in the book about Bed Bath and Beyond, who was just, in a death spiral. And rather than investing in things like online commerce and investing in better looking stores and better service, they just continued this drumbeat of share buybacks to the point where they were actually spending more on share buybacks than the company was worth, than
oh
the
jeez,
market cap of the company. And then the inevitable happens and the company goes out of business. So, why, in service to shareholders for a few years of decent returns, you literally threw the company into the dustbin, you know?
yeah.
So we have to get off this heroin of returns to shareholders, and we have to start thinking again about building businesses that can sustain into the future.
Well, and this goes to that standing in your values, and it's not just standing in your values, right? That you talk about a belief system that has to be in play, and belief being what you hold to be true, values being what you hold to be important, and are you willing to invest in those beliefs and values as an organization? And I think that's the tougher question in front of leaders, because it does mean long-term decision making. It does mean reinvestment in the business, not profit percentage. And to stand in the courage of, and I would offer, I don't know if you've read the book by Bryce Hoffman called American Icon, about Alan Mulally, when he had to turn around Ford and was willing to go all the way to the Wall Street analysts to say, here's the plan,
Right,
so
right,
that they knew that here's you're not getting the profit now, but here's the plan to get there. Here's the plan to get there.
Yeah.
right.
And I think that takes a lot of moral courage.
It does. Somebody said one time that values are only values if you are willing to pay for them.
Mm,
Anybody can put some flowery words, on a website or in a quarterly report about trust and fairness and intelligence, but until you're willing to actually manifest those things through effort and labor and capital and expenditures, they're just words on a page. And so, again, in that last portion of the book, I'm basically presenting a 13-page business plan that says, here, walk this down the hall to your CFO. The rationale, the justifications, the numbers, everything is there. And beside them are the specific actions that you need to undertake as an organization in order to fulfill each of these things. And if you do that, if you're anything like the businesses that have succeeded by virtue of doing them, you're going to win, you know? Uh,
hmm
Interestingly, you mentioned Ford, and that's a perfect example, maybe, of kind of the decision, you know, which direction do you go in as a company? When Ford innovated the moving assembly line, a lot of people felt that that was the advantage, that it was the moving assembly line technology that gave Ford such a huge advantage in the marketplace. And that wasn't the case at all. In fact, the moving assembly line was sort of reverse engineered by other auto manufacturers and other manufacturers generally. Within about 1 to 3 years, everybody was using the moving assembly line. The advantage for Ford came in Henry Ford's recognition that the moving assembly line was going to dramatically increase Ford's productivity. Instead of making 100 cars, they could, in a month or a year, they could now pump out, thousands of cars, and that they could reduce the cost of that unit by, just immeasurable amounts of input cost, rather than just hoarding that money, which he could have done. He could have said, now I'm going to make 10,000 cars a year at half the cost, and I'm just going to take all of that and put it into my own personal fortune. He doubled the daily wage of auto workers from $2.50 to $5 an hour. I mean, my God.
Mm.
Imagine, if any company today, imagine if, JP Morgan said, hey, we've come to the conclusion that we're going to double everybody's salary starting tomorrow. I mean, it would be unbelievable, revolutionary. Henry Ford did that. And the consequence was now the person making the car could afford to buy the car. And they
Mm-hmm.
did. And now
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you saw this burgeoning middle class. And now all of a sudden cities like Detroit, Michigan, and Flint, Michigan, and St. Louis and Cleveland exploded with prosperity because everybody was making more money all the way down the supply chain from Ford. So that's what making the right decision looks like.
Yeah.
And the result is a level of prosperity that raises all the ships in the harbor.
Yeah. And it's a fundamental shift in operational thinking in the sense of this Tayloristic operational efficiencies of process to optimize the labor. Like the right. I've written this book, The Workers Are the Solution, Not the Problem.
Right.
That's really where the benefit sits. And that's a hard, when you talk business case, you're talking numbers, and you're talking the decisions, the tough decisions that you got to make on where your allocations and where your effort's going to go. And I am a firm believer that your people are the ROI, hands down.
And if they're not, then they're the sand in the gears.
Yeah.
And that's the flip side as well. It's okay, fine. You want to knock off, 10,000 people from your company, as we are seeing today,
Mm.
your Salesforce or Meta or any one of the companies today that are just sort of pruning, large branches off their organizations. That's fine, but the morale, that you are the walking wounded that are remaining in the company are now such a drag on productivity,
Mm-hmm.
and the absenteeism that creates, and sort of the quiet quitting that creates internally. We're not able, accountants love to be able to draw straight lines to numbers. Well, try and figure that one out. I don't think anyone can really figure out what the toll is that, bad management of people costs, but we know it's there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What we do know is from really credible study is we know that when you pay people properly, when you pay people fairly, when they come to work with their dignity and they leave with their dignity, when they trust their employer, and when they share that sense of trust with their customers, that the increase in productivity is substantial. The decrease in absenteeism is remarkable. One example is, Costco is noted for treating their employees incredibly well. They pay them disproportionately better than most other retailers do. Great benefits plan, great employee culture. They have 8% turnover at Costco. They have 60% turnover at Walmart. So I don't know, you be the judge, right?
Yeah.
They have 9% compounded annual growth at Costco. They have 3% at Walmart. They have, $800,000 per employee in productivity each year at Costco. They have 300,000 per employee at Walmart. So which company would you rather be invested in?
Yeah.
I'd rather be invested in the one that's paying their people really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've seen some of my clients take, have, 4,000 in, 4,000 out every year. And they're like, how do we stop the bleeding? And so they've gone to pay. And then they were under the assumption that that was the answer. But that's not the whole story, right? That's just one piece of the plan.
Yeah.
It's one piece of the plan, but it's kind of an essential thing. And in the book, I talk about the difference between fairness and equality. And it was a very, I had to be very careful when I was saying this. But my point was that when we talk about equality in corporate settings, it kind of raises the hair on the back of people's necks, right? Because they think, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. What do you mean by equality, right? We're not going to become a socialist company where everybody, is paid the same. I'm not talking about equality. I'm talking about fairness. And fairness simply means that you get paid what you should be paid for your contribution. You are paid in accordance with the contribution that you make to the company. So whatever your effort is, we are going to pay you fairly for that. If you're not even achieving that as an organization, that nothing else you do is going to work. So for Brian Nickel, if Brian, if you're listening, um, nothing you do at Starbucks, no innovation that you try to manifest in the company, no program, no ad campaign, nothing is going to work until you pay people a living wage.
And I do think he's an avid listener of Leadership Kung Fu. So,
There you
chances
go.
are he will hear this.
There you go.
That's sort of a great way to leave off. But I want to, and this is fascinating. And Doug, thank you so much. I think Jen and I both lean into your philosophy on this. What would you say to our listeners as the one takeaway? What do you do as a result of listening to this podcast, buying your book, and making a difference?
I think that oftentimes we seem to feel that our life as a business leader or our life as a business professional is somehow disconnected from our life as a human, as a person. That we go to work and we put on our work hat and we sit down and we make decisions about the business, and then when the bell rings, we take that hat off and we go home and we become a spouse, a partner, a father, grandfather, etc. I think we have to start thinking about these two things uh, as being one thing. That we have to understand that every decision that we make at work is ultimately going to impact the lives of our children and our grandchildren. There's a butterfly effect, and that if we decide that the easiest way to hit our numbers in a quarter is to simply destroy the lives of 1,000 people that work in our business, that ultimately has an effect on the universe. That's putting energy into the universe that's bad, because what happens is our competitors will replicate that in order to keep up. And I talk at the end of the book, I talk about the a thing called the fallacy of composition. And this wasn't my idea, it was from another author that I read, and I thought it's such a great way of thinking about it. um, we have to appreciate that sometimes things that look like good ideas in isolation are really bad ideas if everybody begins doing them. So, I mean, if one corporation bends the rules on their corporate taxes just a little bit, that seems like a good thing for that corporation, and it seems like the right thing to do for their shareholders. But if every corporation starts doing that, then society really takes a hit. Then we can't fund public education and we can't maintain infrastructure. And so we have to start thinking about the actions we take on a day-to-day basis in more of a sense of totality. And we have to start thinking about intergenerational fairness. Are we actually creating a better, fairer, and more prosperous world for the people that we're handing it to? And that would be certainly my hope as a business person.
Amazing.
Yeah. Amazing. Well done. And both Sandy and I highly recommend the read. Again, it is called, what's the title? Competitive Advantage.
The future of competitive advantage.
The future of competitive advantage, because he's a futurist.
Mm-hmm.
And the subtitle is important.
Yes.
Yeah, a business plan to save our
Business plan.
customers, your company, and democracy, which is
Yeah.
huge.
It's bold. It's
Yes.
bold, and it's a time for bold ideas. And I encourage, this is really, it's so kung fu, because it is going to be discipline. It is going to be effort. But I think once you get through it and really consider it, I feel like it's a light. It's a light in the darkness of where we are, to really go, there's a way out. There is a way, and we all have a responsibility to get there. And leveraging business, I think, is a tremendous idea. So
Yes.
Doug, thanks for putting it in the page.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me and shining a light on it. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you so much for listening. You can check out Sandi's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI Consulting INC.ca. And you can check out Jen's website at accountabilityatwork.com. If you like what you hear, let us know by leaving a review on your favorite listening platform. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.